Good morning, class. Today we are gonna discuss Article 6 to Article 10 of the revised Penal Code. Now we have Article 6. It discusses about consummated, frustrated, and attempted felonies. So what do you mean by consummated, frustrated, or attempted felonies? These are stages of execution. What is the at what stage was the crime executed? So we have consummated felonies. Um, the felony can be considered consummated when all the elements necessary for its execution and accomplishment are present. Okay, so and the result sought is achieved. So, for example, um, the felony is homicide. The felony is homicide. So, the perpetrator was able to kill the person, and the person died. Okay, the perpetrator was able to stab the person, and the person died. So, the felony is now consummated. So, that is what you mean by consummated felony. And then we have frustrated stage or frustrated felony. So, how do you know if the felony can be considered frustrated? So, all the acts of execution are present. The crime sought to be committed is not achieved. However, the result was not achieved due to intervening causes independent of the will of the perpetrator. So, like for example, in our example, in the consummated felony, the perpetrator, Mr. A, was able to stab Mr. B. However, Mr. B did not die. Mr. B did not die because there was there was immediate medical help uh, given by another person. So that is what you call frustrated because the result of the crime was not achieved because of the intervening cause. The intervening cause is the immediate medical help offered by a stranger. The intervening cause must be independent of the will of the perpetrator. What do you mean by this? There's what we call desistance. So, desistance is when um, uh, or this is when the perpetrator decides not to actually commit the crime. No, so it should not the intervening cause should not be done by the perpetrator. So it should not be the perpetrator who will help the person he stabbed. Okay, in order for the crime to be considered frustrated felony. Okay. So, how do you know if the crime would be considered? No, we will discuss that later on. Okay. So, that is frustrated felony. Now we go to attempted felony. Because attempted felony and frustrated felony, they are more or less, it has a thin line between attempted and frustrated felony. Now, how do you know if the felony is considered attempted? So, there are overt acts of execution that has been started. So, the overt acts of execution are already started. So, in this case, the Mr. A was already planning to stab Mr. B. He already has the knife. He was going towards Mr. B. However, not all acts of the execution are present. He was not able to stab Mr. B due to reasons other than the spontaneous desistance of the perpetrator. For example, he was going to stab Mr. B, but Mr. B was able to evade the stab. So that is an attempted felony, attempted homicide. And it states there, other than the spontaneous desistance of the perpetrator. So what do you mean by desistance? Desistance, again, is when the act done, when, again, desistance is when the perpetrator decides not to do the final stage of the execution of the crime because of guilt or for whatever reason. So desistance negates criminal liability in the attempted stage. Why? Because it shows that the perpetrator really does not have a criminal propensity because he was able to stop himself from doing the crime. However, desistance is only true on the attempted stage, meaning he was not able to do um, all the acts of execution because of his desistance. However, it does not apply in the frustrated stage because in the frustrated stage, he already did the act. He already stabbed, but then he helped because of conscience or whatever, because of guilt. So he helped his victim. It does not negate criminal liability, it will only mitigate. So again, in attempted stage, if there is desistance, there is no criminal liability. But in the frustrated stage, there is still criminal liability despite desistance, but it would mitigate the criminal liability of the person or of the perpetrator. So, how would you know if the felony is either attempted, frustrated, or consummated? So, number one, in the manner of committing the crime. So, you have to look at how the crime is committed. Second, you have to look at the elements of the crime. Now, in Book 2, each crime specifies the elements. If all of the elements are present, then if all of the elements are present and committed by the perpetrator and it resulted to the crime, then that is consummated. If all the elements of the crime are present and all of the elements were done by the perpetrator but the crime did not result because of other intervening causes, then it is frustrated. And lastly, if one of the elements of the crime is missing because the perpetrator was not able to do the final act of execution, then that is attempted felony. And lastly, the nature of the crime in itself. So again, attempted, frustrated, or consummated, these are stages of execution of a crime. However, the stages of a crime does not apply in offenses punishable by special penal laws unless otherwise is provided for. Unless a special penal law states there that the stages of the execution of a crime is applicable. So for example, in cases of possession of prohibited drugs, there is no attempted, frustrated, only consummated stage. Or in formal crimes, so example in adultery, you cannot say that you committed frustrated adultery. So it's really consummated adultery. There is no attempted adultery. Okay. And then stages of crime is not also applicable in impossible crimes. Okay. Of course, there is no frustrated, impossible crime to homicide. So, only the consummated part. And then, crimes consummated by mere attempt. There are crimes punishable under Book 2, which is being already considered consummated despite the fact of only doing an attempt. So, for example, the attempt to flee to an enemy country, attempt to commit treason, or attempt to do corruption of minors. It is already punishable and considered consummated. And then we have felonies by omission. So, when you say felonies by omission, these are crimes committed by not doing anything. So, the stages of execution of a crime is not applicable, and crimes committed by mere agreement. Okay, so for example, in criminal law, you are not allowed to speculate, not to imagine what crime is intended, but apply the provisions of the law on the facts given. Okay. So, uh, also, because I said earlier that there is a slight a thin line between attempted and frustrated stage. So how would you know if the act would be considered attempted or frustrated stage? So there are two tests. You have to look at the subjective phase and the objective phase. Now, when you say subjective phase, that is the portion of the execution of the felony starting from the point where he has control over his acts. No. So the period is still considered subjective phase when he has control over his acts. If it reaches to the point where he has no more control over his acts, then that is what you call the objective phase. The objective phase, that is a phase that is a period of time where the subjective phase is ended and where the offender has no more control over the effects of his criminal acts. Okay. So, what do if the subjective phase is already completed or has already passed, but the felony was not produced, then the crime as a rule would be frustrated. Okay. So, when the perpetrator reaches the objective phase and the crime or reaches to the period where he has no more control over his action and then the crime did not result, that is that is frustrated felony. However, if the crime is still on the subjective phase, then that is attempted felony. Okay, so for example, you have examples in your notes. Now, for example, Mr. A puts poison in Mr. B's food. And Mr. B was not able to eat his food because he threw the food away. So, A is liable for attempted murder. Why murder and not homicide? Because in Book 2, it states there that attempt to poison a person, that is a circumstance which aggravates killing to murder. Okay. And another example, A stole B's car. The moment that the car is already in the possession of B, it reaches the objective phase. However, B returned the car. So, what is the crime of B? That is consummated theft. Because there's actually a case. In cases of theft, there are only two stages. There is only an attempted stage where there is no frustrated theft. There's no frustrated theft. There is no attempted theft. There's only frustrated theft and consummated theft. I will give the case later on. Or, for example, A aimed his gun at B. No, he aimed his gun at B. However, C held A's hand, which prevented him from shooting B. So he was still in the subjective phase because he still has control over the act. And then Mr. C swayed A's hand, which prevented him from shooting. So that is considered attempted murder or homicide. Now, for example, in the same example we did, A aimed his gun at B. He was able to pull the trigger and shoot Mr. B in a non-fatal part. So he was not able to, or in an area which is fatal, but Mr. B was given immediate medical attention. So what So B was able to survive. Therefore, the crime did not result. So, what is the felony committed? That is frustrated murder or frustrated homicide. So, those are examples of attempted, frustrated, and consummated felony. So, again, these are stages of execution. Now, let's go to Article 7. Article 7 states there when light felonies are consummated. Oh no, when light felonies are punishable. Okay. So before we talk about light felonies, let's go first to Article 9. Now, let's go first to Article 9, which defines grave felonies, less grave felonies, and light felonies. So, what are grave felonies? These are uh, felonies or crimes to which the law attaches capital punishment or penalties which in any of the periods are afflictive in accordance with Article 25 of this code. So when you say capital punishment, that is death penalty. When you say afflictive penalties, it it ranges from prison mayor to reclusion perpetua. Okay, so that is in Article 25. So what do you mean by prison mayor? Prison mayor ranges. No, what is the range of prison mayor? So prison mayor for a while. Okay. Prison mayor ranges from 6 years, no, 6 years to 12 years, and then it also includes their reclusion temporal, which is 12 years and 1 day to 20 years, and the reclusion perpetua, which is 20 years and 1 day to 40 years. So, if the felony is punishable between 6 years and 1 day up to 40 years, then that is considered a a grave felony. Because as of the moment, we do not have capital punishment because that penalty is suspended. So again, those are grave felonies. Now, what are less grave felonies? These are crimes or felonies which the law punishes with penalties which in their maximum period are correctional in accordance with the above mentioned article. So what are correctional penalties? These are prison correctional, arresto mayor, suspension, and destierro. So what is prison correctional? That is 6 months and 1 day up to 6 years. And then arresto mayor is 1 month and 1 day up to 6 months. And suspension, of course, you're being suspended. Destierro, you are not able to go to a certain place for a certain period, ranging again from 6 months and 1 day to 6 years. Okay, so that is a less grave felony. And then we have light felonies. Light felonies are the infractions of law for the commission of which a penalty of arresto menor or a fine not exceeding 200 pesos or both. So, when the fine is 200 pesos, it is considered light felony. If the fine is more than 200 pesos but not exceeding 6,000, that is already considered less grave felony. But if it exceeds 6,000, then it is considered a grave felony. Now, light felony, arresto minor or a fine not exceeding 2,000. Arresto minor is imprisonment of 1 day to 30 days. So, these are considered arresto minor. So, let's go back to Article 7. When light felonies are punishable. So, under Article 7, light felonies are punishable only when they have been consummated. with the exceptions of those committed against persons or property. So if you try to look at Book 2, it enumerates their crimes against persons and crimes against properties. So light felonies are only punishable when they are in their consummated stage. Okay? Except when the light felonies are committed against persons or against properties. So what are examples of light felonies? So we have slight physical injuries. These are light felonies. We have alarms and scandals, malicious mischief of a property not exceeding 200 pesos. So these are considered light felonies. However, if the commission of the crime is against properties and persons, for example, properties and persons, so every stage of execution is punishable. Okay. But only the principals and accomplices are liable for light felonies and the accessories are not. So later on, we will discuss who are the principals, who are the accomplices, and who are the accessory. I think that's in Article 17. Okay, so let's go to Article 8. Conspiracy and proposal to commit felony. So, what do you mean by conspiracy and proposal to commit felony? So, actually, general rule, conspiracy and proposal to commit a felony is not punishable. Why? Because when you say conspiracy, it is only an agreement between two or more persons to commit a crime, and they decide to commit it. Okay? So, conspiracy per se is not actually punishable. But when there is conspiracy between two or more persons, then those who conspire to do the crime and committed the crime will be considered as principal. Okay. Now, when you say proposal to commit a crime, a person has decided to commit a crime and he proposes its commission to another. Now, again, general rule, proposal, and conspiracy to commit a crime is not punishable, except when the law provides for penalty. So, what are examples of conspiracies that are punishable under our law? We have under Book 2, Article 115, the conspiracy to commit treason. Article 136, the conspiracy to commit rebellion. Article 141, the conspiracy to commit sedition. So these are conspiracies. Despite the fact of just having conspiracy, it is punishable by law. Proposals which are punished under the revised penal code, we have Article 115 again, proposal to commit treason, and Article 136, proposal to commit rebellion. Again, general rule, conspiracy and proposal to commit a crime is not punishable unless provided for by law. Okay. So, how can you say that there is conspiracy when there is, again, an agreement of two or more persons to concerning the commission of a felony, and they have decided to commit the felony? So, all conspirators who carried out the plan and personally took part in the execution are equally liable. So, all of them will be considered principal. So, there is a need to prove conspiracy between the perpetrators in order for them to be equally liable. So, you need to prove that there is conspiracy in order to have them equally criminally liable. Okay. So, that is conspiracy as a manner of incurring criminal liability. Okay. So, there must also be an overt act done before the co-conspirators become criminal liable. So, it must be showed from the acts of the perpetrators that there was a common agreement, that there was a common goal. Okay? In order for them to be liable as conspirators. Okay. So, again, conspiracy is only a basis of criminal liability, and none of the conspirators would be liable unless there is an overt act. So, if the conspirators decided to commit the crime, however, they did not actually do the crime, then they are not criminally liable. So, there must be an overt act. There must be an external act showing that they are actually they made up their mind to actually do the crime. Okay. So for as long as none of the conspirators have committed an overt act, there is no crime yet. But when one of them commits an overt act, all of them shall be held liable because they are all conspirators. They all agreed to do the crime even if only one of them did the overt act. However, the conspirator will be uh, absolved from criminal liability when he was absent from the crime scene. So even if he was part of doing the plan and he agreed to doing the crime, however, he was not there on the crime scene, then he would not be deemed criminally liable. Or he showed up in the crime scene but he tried to prevent the commission of the crime. So you will not be considered a conspirator. However, if you are part of making the plan and you agreed to do the crime and then you went to the crime scene even only as a lookout, because there is a conspiracy, you will be considered a principal. Because usually lookouts, they have lesser criminal liability. But when conspiracy is proved, all of you will have equal criminal liability. Okay. So that is Article 8. Conspiracy and proposal to commit a crime. So again, as a general rule, when there's conspiracy, the rule is that the act of one is the act of all. So all for one, one for all. But however, that is only applicable to the crime agreed upon. Now, for example, they conspire to commit robbery. So they plan to rob a house. However, the plan was only to rob the house. The plan was only to rob a house. However, one of the perpetrators raped one of the persons living in the house. Would all of them be liable for robbery with rape? No. So, if the original agreement was only to commit robbery, then all of them will be liable for robbery. However, the perpetrator committing the rape would be liable for rape. Okay? So, not all of them will be considered conspiracy to commit robbery with rape because their original plan was only conspiracy. So, there could only be conspiracy. The act of one is the act of all applies only to the crime agreed upon and not to the crime committed by another conspirator which was not agreed by the other co-conspirators. So that is Article 8. And then we discussed already grave felonies, less grave felonies, and light felonies. Okay. So, felonies are classified according to the manner of their commission. So, we have intentional felony and culpable felony. According to stages of their execution, that is in Article 6, we have attempted, frustrated, and consummated felony. And according to their gravity, that is in Article 9, grave felonies, less grave felonies, or light felonies. Now, why is it necessary to determine whether the crime is grave, less grave, or light felony? So, that is to determine whether these felonies can be complex or not. So, when you say complex, it can be combined with another crime. Okay? And also to determine the prescription of the crime and the prescription of the penalty because the gravity of felonies has a different prescription of the crime. So when you say prescription, expiration in layman's term. So that is why we have to take note if the crime is grave, less grave, or light, and whether it can be complex or not. So we will discuss complex crimes later on. Okay. And we have Article 10, offenses not subject to the provisions of this code. Offenses which are or in the future may be punishable under special laws are not subject to the provision of this code. This code shall be supplementary to such laws unless the latter would specially provide the contrary. Okay. So again, the revised penal code only punishes those which are listed under Book 2. If the crime or the act is not listed in Book 2, it is punishable under special penal laws. Okay, so that is Article 6 to 10 of the revised penal code. Thank you.